One thing I generally appreciate is when stories resolve themselves. And in this case, Comics Hub, something we talked about yesterday and really in the last 24 hours has become a thing, is now suddenly not a thing. So the temporary comics distribution has been halted. Coming as a surprise to really nobody, not even the guy who reported it. Everybody, this is Perch. I want everybody to hear really clearly in my voice. It's not, there's a lot of people smirking and doing videos right now about, haha, I told you so, this wasn't going to work, and so on. And you should not hear that in my voice. It's not how I feel. That's not what I mean. We comics needs other options badly. It needs other options, and the idea of having this get digital now and print later would have been a good idea if it was viable and real, because it would have set up a situation where comic publishers could keep making comics, creators could keep getting checks, comics could get somewhere where they need to be. The problem with this whole plan is that it relied on too many things that were long shots at best and really not stable or good behind that. So what's happened? Well, Comics Hub has announced that the initiative is not going forward right now. Weirdly, as said by John Hendrick of Big Bang Comics. Now, what's very strange here, and this is like classic how not to roll out something, it's also peak comics in that the big mouthpieces for this thing were Ryan Higgins of Comic Conspiracy and John Hendrick of Big Bang Comics. They were really trying to push the Comics Hub platform. I guess we know who's given Comics Hub's point of sale software a purchase, but what's curious about John Hendrick and Big Bang Comics is they have such a terrible reputation online for blocking and not just blocking the baddies, but blocking hundreds of thousands of customers and other shops. And if you go into any kind of Facebook retailer group and you say, hey, who are the biggest kind of pain in the butt shops that exist out there, 9 out of 10 are going to say Big Bang in Ireland, and John as one of those people who really has been an obnoxious voice. So, in a plan that was intended or to be successful, needed to unite comic shops together to sign on, pay money to a platform, and readers to get to trust that if they were going to give their money to someone, that they would eventually get a comic in return. I would not put this guy out as the face of anything. It would be kind of like, I mean, you can use a million examples. It's like, hey, for the Girl Scouts, we've decided to put Harvey Weinstein as our spokesman. It's like that wouldn't be a good plan. Nobody would trust that. No, I'm not comparing Big Bang Comics to Henry Weinstein, but because Weinstein's in jail. That's why. No, sorry, that's not fair. Anyway, at any rate, it's just not going to work. Now, why is it not going to work? Well, the reason given is that they're saying that publishers who were behind the plan are now not. They are not convinced it was a long term plan. So I have this. I don't believe. I'm just going to say I'm going to call no on this, because the idea that Marvel and DC companies, especially Marvel, who religiously controls the media and the output, and DC as well. I mean, to put the point on it, DC waited far longer than they should have to announce their returnability plans and kind of the various things that they were putting in place for comic shops, even though people were pounding them for getting the news out faster. They still were, it was slow in coming. It's because big corporations, the bigger they are, do tend to be a little bit more cautious in what they say publicly and what official words they put out. And in this case, if a big plan was going to come out that was going to rapidly get comics out to consumers, tie digital and physical together into one bundle, it wouldn't happen without DC or Marvel weighing in. They certainly would not say, hey, why don't you guys go ahead and take the lead on making this announcement? And rather than the actual software, in this case, Comic Hub, we're going to go ahead and, rather than Stu Colson making a word, we want the comic shop that is a customer of Comic Hub's software to make this announcement on behalf of Marvel and DC. That just makes no sense. It means people got excited before they should have. Best case scenario, they sent a mail to the publishers or got somebody on the phone and said, hey, we've got this idea. Would you be interested? And the response back was, yeah, we might be interested. I don't know. Let us think about it. That's the most generous version of this story. Unfortunately, the other person who was carrying this story was Bleeding Cool, and in particular Rich Johnson, who, I mean, it has a let's say a very high track record of inventing nonsense, usually for his own purposes. Now, some people were pointing out the kind of silliness of what he was saying, which was a lot of real hyperbole. I know there's that word again. It's just what I do. A lot of exaggeration around. This is going to save all the comic industry's problems. Well, I mean, clearly as a headline written for clickbait, but it wasn't well researched. It wasn't well thought out, and it's just another example of how journalism, particularly in comics, really is not news or journalism at all. Now, I know Rich likes to say he's not a journalist, and he's right about that. But at other times, then he's a credible news source. The answer is no. These are just people scrounging around looking for clicks. What is Comic Hub and why did it fail? I mean, Comic Hub, as I mentioned yesterday, it is a point of sale system. It's designed to help you with your inventory, and it's designed to connect new customers into your shop. Okay, that all makes sense, right? It's not a bad idea, but it does require that other comic shops are going to sign into this. And unfortunately, it's a subscription service, which means the comic shops have to pay to be a member here. And unless all the comic shops, or a big majority of them, all sign up, there's very little incentive for customers to use it. There's just too small of an audience, too small of a shop group to really make this compelling from an end customer standpoint. So how much does this thing cost? Well, I mean, the reality is the pricing here was going to be for setup and launch, $400 to install per store, and then $100 per month per store as a limited offer. It was going to be, I think it turns to $150 per month per store. So if you just look at that pricing, that's expensive. If you're telling a comic shop, okay, look, it's going to be $500, 400 for your startup, $100 per month. That is excessive. That's just flat excessive for any store that does not have that kind of margin. And in addition to the cost, there's the time of then you got to feed this inventory and you got to put information in here. And you're not getting a commitment back of clear that you're going to pull value out of it. There's nothing actually in the highlights or the requirements. If you go to their website, you pull through their model. There's nothing here that exactly explains to you how this is going to bring money back to you. In theory, it will. And companies, comic shops need point of sale. They need these kinds of services. The challenge is you're giving this money to a guy who owns a comic shop down in New Zealand, and you're kind of assuming that it's going to, come back to you. And once again, the real value here is if it kind of homogenizes the rest of the comic industry and everybody gets involved in it, and then suddenly you have a network. But anyway, so it was very unlikely that was going to happen. It was very unlikely too that the publishers were going to want to put kind of their trust in another small company, in this case something much smaller than Diamond. So there is a contract that exists with Diamond. It probably is in breach now with mispayments and other things. So there's an issue there. But if you're Marvel or you're DC or you're even Dark Horse or you're Image, why would you go from a shaky middle solution into a much shakier, a local comic shop owner kind of trying to bootstrap something on his own? Unfortunately, the Comics Hub platform and almost all parts of it, from the app to the service to the database, could be replicated by some college students just bored and doing a project for free. And frankly, that's probably how this network is going to have to survive, is that there's going to have to be some open source, cheap, i.e. free platform. Because if you're going into a retailer, you're asking them, hey, pay this monthly fee. Hey, also invest a bunch of your time feeding this new system you may or may not know. Hey, you've got to do all this extra work, and maybe you get a return. Maybe some new customers will come to your store. Maybe that will justify your out of pocket. So there's way too many pieces here, which meant it was not going to work. And on top of that, I think the individuals involved, all of them exaggerated where they were at with things, and so they spun up a bunch of news and it collapsed. And here we are. So it's not good news that efforts are collapsing. Maybe this is good news that people, and here I'm really talking about the Joe Casadas, the CB Cebulskis, the people like that who like to retweet and engage with Bleeding Cool, they might consider stopping doing that. I think at this point, if you're looking for a reliable source, you could pretty much go to any random person you could throw a rock at on Twitter and get just as reliable a source of information as a Bleeding Cool, who's purely out to use your name and energy for clicks. Sorry, I know there's some people here probably listening who love Bleeding Cool. If you get your information there, be my guest. Definitely use an ad blocker, but that is what it is. But as an industry, if we're going to survive, we have to start growing up a little bit and stop. We shouldn't be defined by the most gossipy, silly, antagonistic people that make up the community. Otherwise, we are just going to wallow in this forever. And unfortunately, that's where it is. So it's a shame. Something that didn't go that should have gone, but here we are, and hopefully some more good ideas are around the corner. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications if you so are so inclined. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. Thanks for listening.